It's no secret that the RTX 40 series lineup of graphics cards from Nvidia aren't particularly known for their value, but there might be a shining beacon of light in that with this. The RTX 4070 Super might indeed be one of the best value RTX 40 series GPUs, and this is something that a lot of people have said. So naturally, I wanted to find out for myself, and when MSI wanted to send over this Gaming X Slim in white, I said, sure, send it on over, I'd love to benchmark this. A quick disclaimer, MSI aren't sponsoring this video, no money changed hands, and I don't even get to keep this graphics card, so all views are my own. But this video does have a sponsor though, and that's Fifine and the H9 gaming headset, geared towards budget gamers, featuring 50mm audio drivers, a detachable microphone, and connections with either 3.5mm or a USB connector. Included with the USB cable is an inline adapter. Here the audio input and output can be controlled, and also included with this there is a mic mute toggle switch, which is a feature I always like to see in a headset. You can game for longer thanks to the cushion padding on both the ear cups and headband, which is adjustable with metal hinges. So for more information, check out the Fifine H9 headset in the description below. So everyone knows that the RTX 40 series of graphics cards aren't particularly great in terms of value, with GPUs like the RTX 4060, 4060 Ti and even 4070 Ti. All of these graphics cards are pretty, well, not great in terms of their value. But this 4070 Super could be a shining beacon of hope for the value enthusiast, as this graphics card only costs $600. Well, I'll say only costs, but for the performance you're getting, I'm pretty sure it's not that bad, so yeah, there is that. But this MSI Gaming X Slim is $50 over the MSRP, but you are getting a much better cooler than something like the regular Ventus. But both this and the Ventus model will be linked in the description below with my affiliate links. I do make a small kickback with these, but it does help out the channel, so thank you if you buy anything through them. So, to see how good this GPU is, I've tested out 1080p, 1440p and 4K with both rasterization and ray tracing results in my testing PC, which has a Ryzen 5 7600, 32GB of 6000 MHz CL36 memory, a 2TB Western Digital SN770 NVMe SSD on an MSI X670E Tomahawk motherboard. The testing has been done using driver version 555.99, see I've remembered the Nvidia driver again, and resizable bar has been enabled. Without any more talking, let's get into the benchmarks. Starting off in Night City with Cyberpunk 2077, and performance across the board, particularly at 1440p and 1080p, is brilliant. 85 FPS at 1440p with 116 at Full HD means the performance for both these resolutions is brilliant. 4K is a bit of a tall order for this graphics card with just 38 frames per second, so yeah, without upscaling, I don't recommend 4K at all, but this is the great thing about Nvidia products. You've always got DLSS, which you can enable, so there is that. The same story continues in Hogwarts Legacy, with both 1080p and Quad HD being excellent performers, with both of them surpassing 60 FPS by a merry mile, but 4K does trail that 60 FPS figure by not that much, and I would say that's decently playable at 52 frames per second, but then again, if you're spending this amount of money on a graphics card, you're going to want more performance than that. So do some settings tweaking or enable DLSS at 4K and all resolutions will be absolutely brilliant on this GPU. Getting into Starfield on the high preset, I thought I was going to be in for a not pleasant benchmarking experience, but to be honest, 1080p and 1440p, from what we've seen today, are performing brilliantly fine, and 4K to a lesser extent is okay. Yes, it's below 60 FPS again, and then always you can enable DLSS and you'll be getting decent performance there. I'm not too sure why Starfield was performing quite well on the 4070 Super, as in the past I've gone on record saying that this game's an absolute mess of a port, but yeah, it seems to be running quite fine here, so no complaints from the 4070 Super here. Fortnite is up next, and Across the board today, you're set for a competitive gaming experience because at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, you're getting more than 150 FPS on average at all three of these resolutions. To get some more performance out of this graphics card, say if you had a 1080p 360Hz monitor perhaps, you could always drop it to the low preset or maybe enable the performance API. But with a Ryzen 5 7600, we are certainly CPU bound at 1080p here. So if I had a 7800X3D, we'll be seeing more performance there. So the 4070 Super is perfectly fine for Fortnite, don't worry about it. Spider-Man Remastered continues to show it's one of the most optimized games on PC right now because all three resolutions are performing nice and fine. Even 4K getting just south of 100 frames per second on average means no matter the resolution you want to play at, you're going to be good to go. I believe both 1440p and 1080p are CPU bound, as soon as you get past the 120 frames per second barrier, the game becomes particularly CPU bottlenecked. So there is that to be known. But if you had a faster CPU like a 7800X3D, you'd be seeing more frames at both 1080p and 1440p, I would imagine. But 120 frames in a story game, I'd take that. Jedi Survivor is a absolute mess of a PC port, but still the 4070 Super's got the horsepower to push past that, because 1080p and 1440p today had very good performance on the Epic preset. Where the 4070 Super does start to struggle is 4K, but to be honest, I was totally expecting this, and even then at 40 frames per second, just enable DLSS on quality, and you should be getting around the 1440p figure that we got today. At both Quad HD and Full HD, the 4070 Super is fine for a competitive experience in Forza Motorsport. Where you might want to do some settings tweaking is at 4K, as 90 FPS on average is not the worst in the world, I'll be honest. But for a racing game, I like to get around 120 frames per second on average, so some settings tweaking may be in order at 4K, but if you were to play at 1440p or 1080p on the Ultra preset, the 4070 Super is perfectly fine. Turning on the eye candy in Cyberpunk 2077 sees some still pretty decent performance. 1080p is totally fine at 82 frames per second, but where you will see some performance dips is at Quad HD. We do drop down to 50 FPS here, but DLSS on quality is always an option and you'll be totally fine there. At 4K, don't enable ray tracing in Cyberpunk because 23 frames per second is more attuned to a Hollywood film and not a gaming experience, so there is that. Hogwarts Legacy sees the same trend as Cyberpunk 2077, but at both Quad HD and 4K, it's a lot more playable, with Quad HD getting more than 60 FPS on average, and 4K does see that drop down to 40 FPS, but yeah, I've seen worse performance than this, and I'd say that's totally acceptable for a card of this caliber. Just enable DLSS and frame generation and you'll be getting a much better gaming experience than this. For some reason in Spider-Man Remastered, the ray traced reflections don't look that great, as they look really noisy for some reason. So across the board, I don't really recommend enabling ray tracing in this game, but if you wanted to, performance basically across the board is very good. At 1080p, we are slightly CPU bound at 89 FPS, as the average frame rate didn't really shuffle that much, and in fact the 1% low went up with Quad HD. 4K sees the most playable results so far with ray tracing, as 58 frames per second is very impressive, I'm not going to lie. So yeah, across the board, the 4080 Super in Spider-Man Remastered with ray tracing is not too bad at all. Jedi Survivor with ray tracing enabled was extremely CPU bound at 1080p, as it got the exact same average as 1440p, and the 1% low improved with Quad HD for some reason. I'm not too sure what that's about. I definitely need to get that 7600 swapped out for a much better CPU, so this is something that I may be working on in the future. However, 4K is, well, it's 4K in Jedi Survivor. It's not going to be the best experience in the world, but it's certainly a lot more playable than Cyberpunk 2077, that has to be known. In a game like Jedi Survivor, I'll recommend enabling DLSS because it looks better than the baked-in TAA. So yeah, just enable DLSS, is literally free performance in Jedi Survivor. Across the games tested today at 1080p and 1440p, there was excellent performance across the board. And in fact, at Quad HD, there was no game that dropped below 60 FPS on average with rasterization. This is brilliant to see, as you would want to see this if you're running ultra settings at 1440p at rasterization on a graphics card which costs $600. But the fact that the performance was really good at Quad HD means, as far as I'm concerned, the performance from this graphics card is quite good. And that kind of leads me to believe that this GPU is kind of a bit overkill for 1080p, as we were very CPU bound in a lot of the games tested today. And this is why I'd recommend maybe something like a Ryzen 5 7800X3D if you're an esports gamer and you will benefit from the high refresh rates, because the esports gaming performance today was perfectly fine at both 1080p and 1440p on this graphics card. And I would say if you had a more powerful CPU than what I use today, you'd be good for a 360Hz and maybe even a 480Hz gaming experience. And if you wanted a 1440p gaming experience, 240Hz in competitive games is also doable there. And speaking of competitive, I've now said that word quite a bit now, this also has Nvidia Reflex low latency like every other Nvidia graphics card, so that's a nice to have. Conversely to this, there is 4K, and if I'm honest, I'm not that disappointed, as this is never marketed to be a 4K gaming graphics card, but with the performance you will be dropping below 60 frames per second quite a bit on average, so that's not that ideal. But you can always enable DLSS on quality and get basically the same performance as 1440p, and this graphics card also supports DLSS frame gen as well, so that's always an option for you if you want to double your frame rate, which is always cool, I suppose. Also, if you want to see a video on the DLSS frame gen, let me know in the comments down below, because I kind of want to see what it's like. For the first time in what feels like forever, I actually do recommend ray tracing on this graphics card. At 1080p, ray tracing was totally fine. I believe it was 60 FPS in every single game I tested today. And at 1440p, in some titles you will be dropping below 60 frames per second on average with ray tracing enabled. But then again, just put DLSS on quality and you're going to be fine, because the performance will be brilliant. Then again, you can always do some settings tweaking, as well as the Ultra preset, which I tested with today in most games, isn't the most optimized in terms of quality to performance, so you could always do some tweaking there. So can this ray trace at 1080p and 1440p? Definitely, just enable DLSS and you'll be fine. Moving back to the graphics card, and MSI have designed this one quite well. It's got a pass-through design with the end of the cooler, as the PCB is about 3/5 up the card, so there is a lot of cooler excess here, so that will help with cooling performance. And this is why you'd probably get a more premium card over something entry like the Ventus, because it will maintain boost clocks for longer, and the temperatures are quite good, as this cooler kept the core under 70 degrees C and the hotspots were peaking at just 78 degrees C. Because the temperatures are looking quite good on this graphics card, I'd say this is worth the extra 50 quid over the Ventus. But if you wanted to save some money, I'm sure the Ventus would also be quite good too. You can't mention the RTX 4070 Super without mentioning the 7800 XT or 7900 GRE from AMD. Both of these graphics cards will have better cost per frame at rasterized performance, and they also come included with an extra 4GB of VRAM, totaling 16GB. This will help you later down the line as games become a bit more VRAM intensive, but for the time being, 12GB is perfectly fine. I believe the 7800 XT goes for around $450 now, with the 7900 GRE going for around $500, which is quite a bit cheaper than the RTX 4070 Super, but for that Nvidia tax, so to speak, you do get some improvements. This thing is very efficient. It didn't consume any more than 240 watts today, which is very power efficient for the performance you're getting. You also get better ray tracing performance, as this graphics card can certainly do it. DLSS, which is better than FSR in basically every single way, as it actually uses the tensor cores for the AI upscaling. And lastly, most gamers aren't going to benefit from this, but CUDA acceleration. So if you're a video editor, the Nvidia card is a no-brainer, and I certainly don't recommend AMD for video editing, because Nvidia is just so much better. So when you consider everything, I'd like to say the RTX 4070 Super is indeed one of the best value RTX 40 series graphics cards. I would have loved to have compared this to the AMD GPUs, which I do recommend if you're just playing at rasterization and you won't be using your PC for any work, as I do believe these are better value than the Nvidia card. But in the lineup of the RTX 40 series, the 4070 Super is certainly not a bad value, and if you needed any of the Nvidia features, the 4070 Super is definitely worth it over the AMD cards. Looking at the MSI Gaming X Slim though, for its price tag of $50 above MSRP, I'd say it's definitely worth it, as the cooler design is way better than those MSRP cards, and yeah, it's just all in all a great graphics card. So the Gaming X Slim in white will be linked in the description below, along with the Ventus, and if you want to see how another graphics card gets on, there's a video up there for that. And I'll catch you in the next one.